nature's gentleman. See his loving hand. Find the food of love for fur and feather friend. He's nature's gentleman, and now his only dream, a sacred piece of ground, a flowing stream. A platypus, a butcher bird, a fierce taipan. All creatures from the wild, safe in his hand. To study and to love, his only plan. His work will help the future understand. He's nature's gentleman. See his loving hand. Find the food of love for fur and feather friend. He's nature's gentleman, and now his only dream, a sacred piece of ground, a flowing stream. A sacred piece of ground, a flowing stream.
David Fleay established a sanctuary at Burleigh on the Gold Coast in 1952. It hasn't been an easy life, and still the 73-year-old zoologist works at least 12 hours a day looking after his valuable collection of animals, as well as carrying out scientific breeding programs. His contribution to our understanding of many Australian native creatures is widely acknowledged, and his ability to breed rare animals in captivity hasn't been equalled. During the nearly 3 decades he's spent at the sanctuary, he's been involved in some extraordinary research projects. They varied from platypus breeding, mating wedge-tailed eagles, to very dangerous research into snake antivenin. David Fleay has been in the forefront in the battle to discover antivenins for many of Australia's most venomous snakes. He was one of 5 who milked the deadly taipan in the early 50s when a bite meant certain death. It was in recognition of his work with snakes that Sir Edward Hallstrom, director of Taronga Park Zoo in Sydney, gave him a boa constrictor for his 70th birthday. On arrival, it weighed only 5 ounces. 3 years later, Boris, who lives under Fleay's small Queensland home, needs 2 people to carry him, and he's still less than half grown. Fleay is still involved with the reptiles, but won't deal with the fast-moving snakes. However, he's still the major supplier of death adder venom for the Commonwealth Serum Laboratories.
Yes, this bag is, mightn't seem very much, but it's very important, because if you leave a death adder out in the open, where he can't get cover in the daytime, he frets. He goes round and round looking for a place to camp, and not being able to find it because he runs himself ragged. You can see the varying colours of the adders here. Some are red. That's a red fellow here. And when they're annoyed, they flatten. You notice he's flattening there. Rather pretty little bloke, isn't he? You might notice that nearly all of them have that peculiar white tail tip, which is a lure. They lie semi-buried, and when very hungry, that twitches and jumps all over the place, that little tiny tail ending, and brings lizards and small birds within reach. The death adder performs a lightning bite, and with that terrifically potent venom, the victim doesn't get very far. He's then located by sense of smell, and a nice little meal is provided in an easy way. That big fellow there is an extra big fellow. In fact, he's generally regarded by the fellows from other institutions who come here visiting as the biggest death adder they've seen. So I think we can claim that he's the largest death adder in captivity at the present time. He's a splendid milker, and we do send periodic yields from this fellow in the dried state to the Commonwealth Seal Laboratories in Parkville, Melbourne. He's fairly quiet. You can see the big venom glands there, as we indicated before. So we'll put him in the bag. One thing about a death adder, he's slow in progression, even though he's fast on the draw. Come on, fellow. Quite well trained, isn't he?
The snake was unusually aggressive, probably because of the heat generated by our lights. This led to Fleay taking the added precaution of instructing his young assistant in the most efficient way of treating him, should the death adder manage to strike him.
You do not put on a ligature as in the old days. You do not gash the wound. You simply follow the instructions here with a crepe bandage, which is bound tightly around the whole thing. You've got figures here to follow, and it's just well to look at it first because I've been present with several snake bites, and there's a tendency to panic. So no panic here, thank you. Now, fella, we've got to pin you. Watch everybody yourself, too. Now, Leanne. All ready? I know. Nice job, a bit of that. And of course, once he's bitten, you press the glands to get the reserve venom out. So watch there you don't put your fingers in the wrong place. He's burst the dam on top of the glass. He's a very powerful adder, this fella. But it's just as well to remember that these adders have venom which is 3 times as potent as that of the Indian cobra. And I think I mentioned just now, I think that they can they would knock over perhaps, for this fellow in particular, would knock over perhaps 100 people if his venom was sufficiently diluted. He's a fine big fellow, isn't he? A real whopper.
David, you've been involved in milking of snakes right from the start, the pursuit of anti-venom.
Yes, way back in the days of the Walter and Eliza Hall's initial work on antivenin in the late 1920s, under Dr. C.H. Callaway, and I suppose I'm perhaps the only survivor now of the people who took part in those early days. And I remember Sir Macfarlane Burnett was a young medico in those days at the Walter and Eliza Hall too, just by way of interest.
So in fact you've been involved in research with looking for snake venin for what, over almost 50 years?
Yes, well fully that, over that I suppose. Yes, 1927 to the present day. We still milk these adders, but I think I'm beginning to regard the other more rapid, fast-moving snakes as, getting a bit beyond.
Now
You've got to be a bit sensible about these things.
You have, in fact, been involved in a couple of firsts here, though, in snakes.
Yes, we milked the first taipan in conjunction with Dr. Morgan, director of the Serum Laboratories, in 1950. That was the one that killed that young fellow at Cairns, Kevin Budden. He captured a taipan, and it bit him, and there was no antivenin in those days. And he died the next day. The snake was flown to Melbourne, and Dr. Morgan and I milked it, got a considerable amount of venom from it, even though it had, bitten, claimed its victim the day before. And from that venom, the initial work on taipan antivenin began. It was perfected in 1955.
Have you ever yourself been bitten and thought you'd never do it again?
Well, I had one bad accident while directing the Hillsville Wildlife Show from a tiger snake. And I was no good for 6 months, and I thought at the time, what an idiot I was ever to play with snakes. He's still here. Well, I better put him back in his bag before he chokes.
The Bushland Reserve is a habitat for several categories of reptiles, the largest of which are the bush guanas. These ferocious-looking animals lie deceptively still in the sun, but with the arrival of a tempting bandicoot corpse, which had met an untimely death on the road a couple of days earlier, the compound burst into life. However, the bandicoot was frozen, and the Guanas had difficulty in biting the rock-hard morsel, but a number did persevere.
Because this is the tree goanna, I would say the toughest character in bushland. They grow to 6 feet. They're clad in what you might call chain mail, and they can take the most terrible punishment. They're often shot by people, but they drag themselves away and in many cases recover. But they are essentially a part of Australian bushland, and I think that it's one of the most interesting creatures we have.
David was keen to show us the defence characteristics of the Guanas, so he went into their compound to provoke them into whipping their tails and climbing the large trees. He had to be very agile to avoid being bitten, as the Guana has to be literally cut off if it sinks its powerful and disease-filled teeth into a leg.
Yes, that's one way they protect themselves. They will whip the tail around like a stock whip, and believe me, it's mighty painful if it gets you across the legs. They can bite. I know in one or two bad bites that I've had when I was younger, that they took sometimes a couple of months to heal, and I've still got some decent scars to locate the spots.
Later in the day, David Fleay showed just how sprightly a septuagenarian he is when attempting to give us a look at Alistair, the 3-metre alligator, which had nearly become one of the most famous in the world. To ensure we could see clearly, Fleay decided to empty and clean the alligator's poo. The large reptile was kept at bay during this exercise by the continual spraying of a stream of water at his cavernous jaws. Initially, there were no problems, even though Alistair indicated his discontent at having his lovely, slimy home spring cleaned. However, things went wrong when the local council chose this time to work on the water supply, and the pressure dwindled to a fine spray, hardly enough to deter an alligator with a tasty 2-legged meal within striking distance. Discretion was the better part of valour for our intrepid naturalist. When the water drained from the pool, Alistair was a picture of docility, and David recounted the breeding success story that would have astonished the world had tragedy not struck.
Yes, I picked this fellow up in Chicago in 1947. A tiny thing, about, I suppose, a couple of feet long or less. And I suppose I had half a dozen really, brought them back after the Platypus trip to New York. And when we came to Queensland in 1951, I brought this one along. And we had it for, as you know, we've had him right up to the present day. But we reared a saltwater croc later on, some years later. And we had to subdivide this pool. The possibility was that the bigger alligator would have swallowed the croc, which of course was quite a small thing. Anyway, as the years went on and we saw them growing bigger and bigger, we discovered that when the spring seasons arrived, say October, November, that this alligator was more affable towards the other fellow. And eventually, 16 years after the initial start here, we got a tremendous surprise one morning to find there was a great gaping hole in the division, and they're both in together. Well, several years elapsed, and we still weren't sure that we had a pair there. But
you were really expecting that a saltwater crocodile and a freshwater alligator were going to get together.
Well, we weren't sure, but we thought it might be possible. They're two different genera. They're not even, two different species. They're rather widely separated. But anyway, within, I suppose, 2 or 3 seasons of the two getting together, they were still quite well disposed towards one another. And we could see that the croc was getting around towards laying eggs. And then this terrible tragedy occurred when 5 young fellows who'd spent the night on the parking area, camping there a Friday night, got in here early in the morning when we were in Burleigh picking up stores. And they picked up lumps of concrete which were lying in a heap not far away, and they belted that unfortunate crocodile until her snout was just a pulp. And she went into the water, and the breathing apparatus, the sort of valvular snout there that the bump you see on crocodiles, was not in going order, of course, because of this vandalism, and she drowned in very short order. Well, we rang the museum, had the museum take her, and they held a post-mortem, and she contained, I think it was 16 fertile eggs, not far from the laying time. And that at least proved that you could, there was a likelihood, or it certainly was a fact that you could cross an alligator and a croc. But we were denied the wonderful experience of having this croc lay eggs and hatch them.
It's never been done before or since?
Never been done or since. We can't find any literature to, to support a successful cross.
Would you try it again?
It's a bit late. I couldn't see myself at the age of over 80 racing around looking after crocs, can you?
More than half the animals in the sanctuary were brought to David Fleay when they were injured, and it's still almost a daily occurrence.
Good morning, Mr. Fleay.
Good morning. One kookaburra?
Yes, I picked him up on the highway near the quarry.
Presumably run into by a car, knocked by a car. Is one left wing broken, not too bad though.
And you think he'll be all right?
Well, I hope so.
When I first saw
As I
him,
said, it all depends on, see the car. I just mentioned that the car that hit him was already doing 40, 50, 60, 70 miles an hour.
No.
And the impact is terrific.
Yes.
One thing we couldn't take it very well, could
No.
we? No.
But he was really just lying flat, and I left him for half an hour because I thought there's no point in bringing him to you because he's not going to survive.
Well, there's no bone projection, so I think we can keep him quiet for a few weeks, and I think he might be right again.
That's really good.
Let's hope.
Yes, let's hope so.
Yeah. All right, we'll do our best.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Is this fairly typical of the birds that are brought to you, Dave?
Well, it's typical of the unfortunate kookaburras and tawny frogmouths. Those two are the two chief victims of the motor car.
Is this the major problem caused by traffic?
It's not. This is the traffic problem. Certainly, in a place like the Gold Coast, we've got cars cruising about at high speed all day and night. But the worst thing affecting kookaburras and many other birds, of course, is the pesticide problem. They take in dieldrin, lindane, chlordane, all these other wretched things with their food. In other words, the dieldrin and so on is used in gardens. The dying insects are easily caught by the kookaburras. They're swallowed, and they build up in such a concentration that even if they don't die, their eggs are no good. Well, it's a pretty well-known thing at the present time.
But is this wiping them out?
Well, it could wipe the kingfishers, of which this is the biggest, in time. Rather tragic, really, because you just wonder whether it's worthwhile. You turn it loose and it'll probably die of pesticides in any case.
Now, how many would you say of the animals here in the reserve have come from animals brought to you because they were injured?
Well, I'd say, Earl, that I'd say fully half of the creatures that are here, and some of those that have made history by, breeding for the first time, captivity, giving us information about life histories we'd never have got otherwise, have been crippled, in the first instance. The goshawks up there, the grey goshawks, those were crippled birds, and we eventually bred them for the first time in a captive state. Got a lot of valuable notes too.
Is it difficult for you to cope with the numbers of injured animals brought to you?
Well, it gets to be a little bit of a chore. You get unfortunate things that are, in a bad way. You've got to do what you can for them. You've got to straighten them out. These frogmouths, of course, are, there are 7 here at the present time. There are never less than, say, 4, because some of them do recover and take off again. But I suppose we would get 60 a year, frogmouths alone. And many, many kookaburras, which are knocked on the road.
These frogmouths are an interesting bird. They seem to be part of the log almost.
They do. They are actually not owls. People refer to them as frogmouth owls, but they are nightjars. Nightjars are found throughout the world. They're night-flying, big mouths, small-footed birds, and mainly, hunt insects. But because these fellows have the wide open mouths of the nightjars in general, and they'll eat frogs, they'll eat earthworms, grubs, beetles, moths, and even mice. They're pretty catholic in their tastes.
The reserve is also a quarantine station, and his ability to breed has led to him providing exotic birds such as the Victoria crowned pigeon to several other zoos and sanctuaries in Australia. In fact, this unique bird can only be obtained from David Fleay now that it's no longer allowed to be imported from Papua New Guinea. His ability to get this glamorous giant pigeon to perform is symptomatic of his extraordinary communication with his animals.
Mr. Fleay, what's so unusual about these Victoria crown pigeons?
Well, Earl, they would be probably, like I say, not probably, they certainly are the biggest of the pigeons, biggest of existing wild pigeons. As you can see, they're about the size of a rooster, and they belong to the New Guinea area where they've evolved in that, tropical rainforest. They thrive on the tropical fruits, and they don't have any predators to speak of that really could wipe them out.
Just human beings?
Human beings, pythons, but of course you've got to remember that there are no predators of the cat family up there, and they've had a pretty free run for many years, and hence the size.
Why is it so unusual to find them in zoos or sanctuaries?
Well, they are fruit salad eaters, so to speak. They've got to have a special makeup in the way of food, and they must have a certain climate, which is that of, well, very close to that of a tropical rainforest. And if you don't provide all these things, well, they just won't thrive, let alone breed. It's very difficult to breed them even here in these latitudes. We have bred about 7 since 1958.
Is that unusual?
It is unusual. For quite a while, we were the only ones who were having any success. But I must say that lately, the last 2 years, we haven't had a single young one hatched.
I gather they have, in fact, a very close family relationship.
With
With
pigeons.
each other? No, the
yes.
the pair.
Yes, they pair off, for life. The male is a bigger bird. He goes through some fantastic performances in the way of showing off. He makes a sound like bumper, 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 because we call him Bumper for that reason. But we should be able to, we hope we'll be able to make him do it so you can, see what it's like.
And that's his mating dance, is it?
Well, it's a performance designed to impress the other bird. And I should say it's most impressive too. Come on, Bumper.
Is he in jeopardy in survival in New Guinea?
Well, I'm afraid so, because, see, the indigenous people there now have shotguns, rifles, and you could it'd be very hard to miss a bird of that size. And like most pigeons, they fly up onto a horizontal bough and just sit there. I don't know if they think they're invisible or not, but it's a very easy mark for anyone with a firearm.
It's the sitting pigeon syndrome.
Sitting, it should be sitting pigeon instead of sitting duck, don't you think?
However, it's in the little-known area of Australia's owls that David Fleay has excelled. He's been studying them for years and has collated the most comprehensive information on the otherwise little-understood species. Breeding, once again, enabled him to investigate them more thoroughly.
That is a fledgling sooty owl. Or now a sooty owlet would be a more correct way of putting it, wouldn't it? About 10 days old and hatched here in one of our aviaries. We have the only sooty owls in a captive state, and the whole idea is to find out something about them.
Now, you're concentrating quite a lot of your research on owls. Is there any other research being done on owls in Australia?
Not as we are doing it. Not going through the whole business of, securing them at a young stage, rearing them so that they will accept captivity, and then nest, you see. If you go in out and caught some adult owls, you would be very remote. The chances of breeding them would be very remote. And remain wild.
Well, what's the importance of the research you've done so far? I think you've got all the breeds here, haven't you?
We've got all the Australian owls here in captivity, with the exception of some of the subspecies, of the various species. It'd be a lifetime or 3 lifetimes before you got all of those. Well, the one that is let's say, the most intelligent, lively, versatile of all is the barking owl. That there's no doubt at all. That's the bird that is the extraordinary screaming note on occasions that frightens the life out of people. It was put down to the powerful owl for many years, but we have proved by, a long time of keeping it, and breeding them and listening to them at all times through the year. That it's not the powerful owl of the streams, but the slightly smaller barking owl.
In fact, I think you think that the barking owl is perhaps the most perfect of all birds, don't you?
Well, I would say it comes pretty close to it. It's equally at home day or night. I think if you were a falconer and you wanted to go and chase rabbits, you could do so night or day with a trained barking owl, a male, which is the bigger bird of the two.
Why is there so little known or been put down about Australian owls?
Well, I think it's mainly a matter of ignorance. It's a strange thing, rather a humorous angle, really, to know that some of our top-notch radio and television people use the calls of the English tawny owl in Australian bush settings.
David Fleay considers it essential to the study of Australian birds and animals that controlled breeding be carried out. As a result, over the years, he's achieved major successes in breeding many wild creatures never before bred in captivity. These include the wedge-tailed eagle and the powerful owl.
Yes, well, those two wedge-tails nested successfully for the very first time in a captive state for any wedge-tailed eagle in 1977. They reared one young one that first year. The following year, there was a repeat. And the third year, 1979, last year, they had twins. From the successful nesting, we've learned quite a lot about period of incubation, the nest building, the division of labour in bringing out the eggs, because the male bird does take a stint on the eggs. But it's noticeable that the hen bird, who's by far the bigger bird, sits always at night. The male bird does his shifts on the nest in the daytime. Very interesting towards late afternoon to see the hen bird becoming a bit impatient and flying up and pulling the wing feathers of the male to tell him it's time to get off. They do go in for a lot of hygiene methods. In other words, keeping green gum leaves under the eggs right through the incubation period. Apparently, mites and all sorts of parasites are liable to cause trouble, and the birds take care of that by getting a certain amount of mature green gum leaves and taking them to the nest and adding them to the mattress underneath the eggs. All the young ones so far have been liberated at a sort of reasonably mature stage from Springbrook. We haven't heard from any of them since, so I presume that all went well.
With your love, I will climb the highest mountain, fly like an eagle on the wind, dance to the music of the fountain, laugh like a gypsy violin. With your love, there is peace all around me. I can see the flowers once again, and the moon above can smile, for love has found me. I can.
David Flay's wife is also a scientist and worked for years by his side. Now, after nearly 50 years of marriage, she settles for just making the morning and afternoon teas for the workers on the reserve and looks back with mixed feelings on the struggles they've shared.
After we were married 21 years, I've said it's 21 years in captivity. You know, that's a life sentence. It's more than a life sentence these days, isn't it? Now we've been married nearly 49 years. It was a terribly interesting life while I had the strength to enjoy it. I've been to New York twice with platypuses, met some wonderful people, and David's done some marvellous things, but, you know, it's got a bit beyond me.
But you're obviously very proud of him.
Oh, well, yes, he's a most unusual man. I think he's a genius. Certainly a pioneer. And he's being acknowledged as such these days, but I don't know. He could have a lot more help than he has had. He's never had any help from the government, from any government at all. Everything he's done on his own, against tremendous odds. It just shows, you know, the tremendous perseverance of the man and the determination and the sheer grit. It hasn't been easy for him. He's had a lot of disappointment, a lot of discouragement. In fact, years ago they tried to push him about 6 feet underground several times, but he just wouldn't be pushed. He fought back and made a name for himself. He's been absolutely devoted to the animals all these years, and the animals have been his first consideration. And, well, any reputation he has, he thoroughly deserves.
Perhaps David Flay's most notable achievement is breeding the platypus. These fascinating and mysterious mammals are very seldom seen in the wild, let alone in captivity. And despite many attempts by other naturalists, there has only ever been one successful mating. His reputation as the world's foremost authority on the platypus led Walt Disney to the sanctuary, where they constructed a special platypus pool. The cameraman and crew filmed for a whole year to capture pictures of this extraordinary little animal. But that was in 1955, and the pond and the underwater glass viewing area were in a deplorable condition, thanks mainly to the efforts of the scrub turkeys who turned the Disney set into a massive earth mound. Still, the only way really to capture the platypus on film was to resurrect the platypussery. David Fleay reluctantly agreed to risk transporting the male, as his mate was too sensitive to handle such an experience. In between time, Alec, one of the sanctuary's longest-serving staff, collected the hundreds of worms necessary to feed the platypus in the new pool. The pool was filled, and the temporary repairs held sufficiently well. But it was necessary to keep 2 hoses pouring in, as the leakage factor was enormous. And then it was time to bring the platypus across from his protected environment to the open viewing pond.
Well, this is a big bill. Quite a big platypus for these areas. We've had him now for nearly 14 years. And as you see, he's a sturdy, big, heavy fellow, about 4 pounds in weight.
How dangerous is what we're doing to him?
Well, from the psychological angle, it's not the best thing for him. But there's also the risk if you get your hands too close to him and he latches on these spurs, well, you're a codfish. It can be quite serious to get a decent injection of platypus venom.
He doesn't seem to be enjoying it in there.
No, you reckon it's not his place at all.
Now, you think this is quite a risk, though, to do what we're doing, don't you?
Well, he's a platypus we've had all these long years. I suppose he would be 14 years old. He's been here for about 13 and a half.
None of the platypus that we used during the Walt Disney filming, I suppose, survived.
Oh, they were liberated.
Were they?
Yeah, that'll be, about 1955.
Right.
And, of course, 55, 65, 75. It'll be well beyond the platypus lifetime, I presume. No one knows how long they live. But according to what you see here with this sturdy fellow, I would say they live at least 20 years, possibly more. What I think I better do is lean over, put this down as far as I can, and open the box with him walking.
Are you surprised he's taken to the water so well?
Well, he should be an educated platypus by now, shouldn't he? But being a platypus means that he can go off at a tangent any time, any of them can. Of the pair we have here, this is Big Bill and Penny, Penelope. This fellow is by far the most placid. That's the reason we haven't, brought the female out from her normal place of residence, because she would panic and do her quite a lot of damage, probably put her off her food.
What exactly has he been doing since he's been in there?
He's been orientating himself. He's been finding out all about it. He's never been in this particular pool before. He's on the surface there now, having a good look round. And a good listen too. Because below the surface his eyes and ears are shut and he's relying entirely on his beak. You might notice he's got rather a bare patch on his tail. That's typical of quite a number of platypuses. They use the tail as a trowel in the tunnels, moving loose soil behind them, and they gradually wear that stiff hair back until the next molting season when they grow a new covering.
Mm-hmm. Why do they eat as much as they do?
Well, they have to put forward tremendous efforts to find the food that they want, and also you must remember they're losing heat in the cold water. This is a mammal, not a fish. And therefore they spend practically all night long hunting for food and using up, burning up the fuel as they secure it.
How much would that one eat a day?
Half his weight, and he weighs 4 pounds. He's quite a big platypus by local standards.
Why is it almost impossible to breed them in captivity?
Well, it's the extraordinary temperament. They're absolutely finely adjusted to the life they lead. I don't think any animal is more, magnificently adjusted to the environment it favours. And any deviation, slight though it might be, from that means they're not happy and they will never get round to nesting. We bred them once, about 43, 44, and the mother nested again 2 years later after that successful event. And I took the eggs away. You see, we were using about 2,000 earthworms a night for mother, father, and the fully grown young one of the successful breeding. So we couldn't possibly let any more hatch. Well, since then we've tried year after year. In fact, we've been with platypuses now for 45 years, and we find that although they nest, Penny and this male, of course, have been at the back of, 6 nesting events in 10 years. And although, as I said, the eggs are fertile, and necessarily are, they're mammal eggs, there's been no success beyond one young one that died at the age of about 2 months. Well, we've had the food items analysed, and we find that all the freshwater crayfish, the lobbies, yabbies, whatever you like to call them, are carrying DDT. So I think that's...
so once again, insecticides are intruding into their lifestyle.
I'm afraid, very much afraid so. And there's room for quite a bit of investigation to find out whether that is so. It'd be a shocking thing if the platypus, which even now is possibly endangered, was allowed to pass out.
You think that's a chance, do you?
Well, there's a chance, and the rest of the world, I think, would rather look down on Australia for allowing such a thing to happen.
Then it was time to return him to his home. This was easier said than done, as the agile and evasive platypus wasn't overly keen on being scooped up in the net. Finally, though, the little fellow was back on dry land, and David used a Hessian bag to show the defensive spurs to effect.
Right now? Yeah.
After 2 attempts, the platypus became so angry it drove them home so far into the bag they couldn't be removed.
Yes, he has now.
Right, gee, did you see that?
He's gone in there.
See him pushing them in, look. He'll hang by his spurs. See, he's hanging by his spurs now. I'm just... See him doing his best to stick them in. Not bad, is it?
And that'd really make you sick with that.
Yeah. When we get him off there, have a look at those spots and see. Yeah. You covered that, did you? The actual strike when he decided to... He's still inclined to do it, see?
So the platypus, sacked, and a very concerned David Fleay took off to rush the now very agitated platypus back to the comfort of his home and his mate.
You know what we'll have to do? Well, go right back to the tank and let him get off in there. You've got to let it go. All right?
The sanctuary is David Flay's life, but it is also a superb piece of real estate in the centre of Queensland's booming Gold Coast. The views and location are superb. The value of the land as a development site is enormous, and that's the Flay's concern. They have battled for years to get some agreement that will ensure the sanctuary's survival after David Fleay dies. There have been numerous approaches to state government and to the Gold Coast Council, but with little success. And the future of the sanctuary is still very much in the air. It takes quite a lot of money to run a reserve of this size, and even the hard work of David Fleay and his small team barely keep up with the demand. His concern is that his remarkable collection of native and exotic animals and birds may have no future if agreement isn't reached. He's had a life of successes, and yet, as his wife revealed, appreciation of his contribution to expanding the knowledge of Australian fauna has been slow to come in his own country.
David, it does appear as if there's more recognition of your work overseas than there is here in Australia.
Well, we do have quite a lot of correspondence with people overseas, and they seem to be particularly interested in the things we've done. But I do have some good friends on this side, you know, who are working along similar lines. But it's always been a bit of a battle. I suppose we're perhaps, what do they say, a bit ahead of your time. But,
it does seem as if you're still battling now with the state of the sanctuary.
Yes, we're able to keep this place going, but only just. And therefore we can't keep things, you know, as right as they should be in the way of housing and paddocks and so on. And our boundary fence is a really good fence, but the internal fences don't allow us to, you know, keep the kangaroos off various places for regrowth.
That made me wonder why you weren't getting more support, say, from government or other institutions.
Well, I don't think that the Queensland State Government understands exactly what we have been doing and what we've been trying to do.
But if you die, and you're 73 and getting on a bit, and you seem slightly concerned about that, what happens to the park then?
Well, it'd be a great pity to see this 65-acre area succumb to the pressure of developers, and also with it the fish habitat area of Tallabudger Creek. But this is the only sort of protection that the creek has. This wooded area of ours, you know, runs right along the banks for so far.
Are you getting any reaction? You're trying to save it, obviously.
Well, I have been negotiating with the National Parks and Wildlife, with Mr. Gibbs, the Minister, and also with Mr. Hintz. And we don't seem to be getting along remarkably fast, because I would like to see them take it over eventually. But all I'm asking in return is that they purchase 37 acres, which is, you know, untouched. A wonderful bit of country over here, suitable for koalas, all sorts of things. And with what they pay me for that, I'll be able to upgrade the 20 acres inside. And when I die, they'll get the lot, the animals, everything. It's a B-class quarantine station. It's at a point of development, generally speaking, which would be very handy for a kick-off in the right direction.
Your love, I will climb the highest mountain, fly like an eagle on the wind, and dance to the music in the fountain. Laugh like a gypsy violin. Laugh like a gypsy violin.
What would you feel if it all stopped?
Well, I'd feel very regretful, but we're not finished yet, you know.
You can bet on that. You know, I usually prefer animals to people, but David Fleay is an exception. And I'm delighted to tell you that since the making of that film, the sanctuary has been taken over by the Department of Parks and Wildlife. Mr. Fleay, today 78, still manages his animals. Thanks for joining me tonight. See you tomorrow night for the news. Good night.
He's nature's gentleman, sees a loving hand, finds the food of love for fur and feather.
Next on 7 Beyond 2000, and Ian Finlay takes you to the furthest reaches of the galaxy and asks, are we the only intelligent beings in the universe? Beyond 2000 next, followed by Simon and Simon at 8:30, then Agatha Christie's Partners in Crime at 9:30.
A sacred piece of ground, a flowing